And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at coalitionradio.us. There was an historic moment this week in the state of Rhode Island. Governor Dan McKee signed into law a first-of-its-kind legislation in America talking about something called harm reduction centers. The next day, the press release was issued, and all hell broke loose across Rhode Island. If you will, the purveyors of outrage porn, clickbait, what's your favorite color style of radio, were in high dudgeon and painting pictures of addicts passed out on the streets of West Cranston and North Cumberland and Lincoln. Such perfidy, such a crime. Had they done their research, had they done their due diligence, madness afoot in the city of Providence, if you will. Folks completely in denial, citing that the recovery centers need to be in places of Woonsocket, Arctic, South Providence, because that's where the addicts are. There was a tinge of reefer madness in the air. All sorts of dire predictions. Cats and dogs, dogs and cats, right? Well, the purpose of this effort, going back, I guess, the 8 years or so that we've been on the air, first as a weekly, hourly show on, well, we've had a home at just about every platform in Rhode Island, until this year when we finally got our own studio high above the hills in Providence, Rhode Island, was to diffuse that type of nonsense, to bring on the air subject matter experts, people who could speak to, if you will, the type of issues that concerned Rhode Islanders, and information that could, well, quite frankly, make Rhode Island and the greater country a place where we tackled the challenging issues of the day, regardless of what they were: war, pestilence, the war on drugs, recovery efforts, police issues, political issues, criminal justice, civil rights. We could tackle them square on without the need to inflate and inflame egos and hostilities, simply by, as one great philosopher from the 60s, from a television show called Dragnet, would say, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Amongst this madness, I was listening to a local media outlet, and our guest tonight came on the air towards the end of a segment and tried to instill a level of peace and common sense and introduce a little bit of knowledge to what is arguably one of the most challenging situations, dramas, tragedies in American life in the year 2021. Greg Graustein is the Chief Clinical Director for Recovery Connections Centers of America. They have a facility here in Providence. They are on Wickenden Street. We have shared their link as part of our pre-show publication, and we'll be sure, if you have someone in recovery or looking to go into recovery, we will be sure to share all sorts of information about their center with you before the close of the show. Greg, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for trying to shine a little bit of, that crazy science and knowledge thing that seems to be cast aside so that we can let emotions run wild. How are you tonight?
Doing well. Thank you very much for the time.
Let's start from the beginning here. First of all, let's talk about your organization, what they do, their history, and maybe a little bit of background on how you got involved as a career in running and establishing recovery centers. I guess not just in Rhode Island, but your organization stretches into Massachusetts, and you have other outlets as well.
All right, a little background. I have 22 years in mental health addiction, local mental health agencies in Rhode Island, doing addiction medicine with chronically mentally ill for 22 years. I also then worked with Roger Williams Hospital Detox as a placement specialist. And then I was hired, and I did 13 years with the creators, what is known of Suboxone and Sublocade, which is a buprenorphine treatment for treatment of opiate dependency. At that point in time, I was exposed in those 13 years to uh, majority of Rhode Island and East Coast of Massachusetts to all different types of recovery facilities using buprenorphine. I was training and helping doctors with the license. So at that point in time, I've been exposed to seeing the high end facilities right down to urgent cares and primary cares trying to treat for opiate dependency with Suboxone and now Sublocade. So I was exposed to that. When I left Indivior being the company, I took the role here in the center that I saw that had the greatest potential of growth and decreasing stigma by its model of approaching this disease. They created themselves about 6 years ago in Providence. That was their mothership, and and on Wickenden Street, and now have at least five more in Massachusetts from Dartmouth, Taunton, Brockton, Attleboro, Natick, and we have five more that we're attempting to open throughout many other towns of Massachusetts at this time.
From your experience, when did the coming storm become the storm in terms of this fire that's blown out of control? And of course, the easiest question to answer all night, and what's going to be a challenging conversation, is this fire, this recovery, this opioid rage, is it restricted to any one race, creed, socioeconomic group, geographic group?
So as we've all seen, from the famous to from famous people to influential people to the common people and the forgotten people, it's across the board. We know people that from Michael Jackson to Prince that had an opiate dependency that took their lives, right down to then the common person that we don't hear about or we don't know about on the street. It influences everybody because at some point in time, a majority of the people have had to have surgery or had something that exposed them to opiates. And sometimes people ran with it. Some people sometimes, hopefully, didn't. And when they did, they became dependent, and it influenced. It didn't matter what economic level you were at. If you thought you were college grad, almost 60% of people with opiate dependency have a college degree. So it doesn't make it a economic statement of like only the poor, or it reaches all facets.
A lot of is made about the notion that opioids are triggered or should trigger a dependency in individuals who may have suffered other maladies, who are overprescribed painkillers in relief of that. And some of those folks, of course, being folks who are suffering from chronic pain. What's the true genesis of the opioid crisis in America? Is it the Dr. Feelgood phenomenon? Or was it just, in your humble opinion, a blatant manipulation by certain pharmaceutical manufacturers to force feed this into the American system?
Well, I think in 1995, when OxyContin came out and was selling themselves, when they created the long-acting opiate, and it was to relieve pain for up to 12 hours, that it was marketed in such a way that it did do what they were saying. If you had chronic pain, it was a relief. However, if you chewed it, it created that 12 hours relief all within that first hour. And that's, they didn't really recognize that or talk about that, but that was one of the epicenters of time, that instead of what we know of heroin always being in the market for years and years and years, and that population, and opiates being part of even children learning from dental, getting their first teeth removed and having Tylenol 3 and having an opiate in that such a way. But the real epicenter in 95 with OxyContin, and marketing itself as, it's a time release, so it's less likely to be opiate dependent and more controllable, and them really using that opportunity to expand and sell it. So, and now they're paying the price for it. but more importantly, the people have already paid the price for it.
Prior to the pandemic, there was a great deal of very visible political, social activity surrounding the opioid epidemic. With the onset of the pandemic, it appeared to, well, have disappeared. And we are all adults here. We all know about the news cycle in America. If it's hot, if it bleeds, it leads. Did the opioid epidemic go away during the pandemic, or did it just go underground?
No, it actually increased. And what really increased was we were aware, public and media has been, really picking up the pace since 2002 when Suboxone came on, the loss of many famous people and situations, and then more and more people had friends and family coming out of the closet, opiate dependency. And then what happened was with the emphasis on treatment was getting momentum, and Suboxone was on the street, being in clinics were creating this, and the media was taking hold because more and more people, famous people, were perishing. The epidemic, the pandemic, has created a situation where you'll see in the next couple of months when the studies come out is that we've had more deaths, and it's because usually if you score some drugs, you are with people, and that we're knowing that, and this is pre-fentanyl, and would go to uh, with someone, and if they shot up and was going to pass out and overdose, that your person near you hopefully would have Narcan and bring you back. The pandemic has created a situation where people are isolated, and there's more and more deaths now because they're doing it alone, and that those studies are being tabulated now. They're slow to publish them out there, but clearly we know by the amount of EMS reports, of police response, ambulance response, and the death response, those numbers have gone back to an increasing amount per capita across the country. So
Talk to us about, talk to us about New England, where your organization has established a significant footprint. Again, is there any rhyme or reason to this? Is there any one area? We talk very often about areas of central Massachusetts, central Connecticut, sort of the extremes, and there's a tendency for folks to relegate the epidemic to those areas, and again, with almost a sense of looking down at their nose, it's not happening here.
Right now, I'll tell you a story, twofold. We do urine testing on every client that comes in to make sure that they're on our current on the buprenorphine medication. And all of a sudden, marijuana will come up. A majority of people from Massachusetts would be on the marijuana, and all of a sudden, fentanyl is coming up, and they're like, "No, I didn't buy fentanyl." Fentanyl now is being used and distributed throughout the majority of all street drugs. If you're buying cocaine, there's probably fentanyl in it. If you're buying Adderall, and I flew with a young woman down to see my daughter in Carolina only 2 months ago, and she was telling me about her son who bought Adderall, and it was fentanyl, and he perished, and they had no idea. So the idea that you have to be in a socioeconomical downtown or that place, or that's where all the drugs are, no way. Right now people are going to be experiencing opiates. If they're buying something on the street, there's a potential of a lethal dose of fentanyl being in there because it's not FDA approved on how these guys are creating this bathtub batch or whatever you're trying. So from methamphetamine, gabapentin, Adderall, marijuana, cocaine, there's a good chance that someone has done. That's why you'll see now that people are putting out testing strips. That's one of the big things on the market that's coming out is bring in your stuff and test it first to see if it has fentanyl before you put it in your vein or smoke it or snort it. So that's one of the first things that were coming out to saying here, and that's before these safety sites. And I presume at the safety sites, you'll have actually that testing to see if the person thinks what they're going to do is actually what they bought.
Right. So there are a couple of points during the last few years of this epidemic that are that are notable. Um, First of all, we could talk about Narcan. Uh,
Hmm.
when did that become mainstream? And from your perspective, when you read about these cases, and so much of this for the general public is anecdotal, which is why I'm grateful you're joining us tonight. Uh, you hear these stories of people being revived time after time after time again. What's the
Hmm.
history of Narcan, and how pervasive is it now in American law enforcement, the rescue community, in terms of first responders, as well as the rescue and the recovery community within folks who have acknowledged addiction?
I can't give you how long Narcan's been around. I don't have that off the top of my head, but clearly it's been around in the medical field for I don't even want to guess to say 20 years, but this was medically in the hospitals, the emergency rooms. A person came in and was given Narcan then, and it finally got the approval to come out into the community. And there was a big uproar from the community saying, well, we should have our first responders and the EMS and even the police who were the first ones there to administer it. And it took the public to realize, all right, can a police officer administer a medication before even EMS showed up, and the person was literally dying in front of them. So um, Narcan was able to be used there. Jody Rich in Rhode Island signed an
Right,
order a number of years ago to Dr. Jody Rich
right.
signed an order to CVS for all of Rhode Island to allow people to go in and get it themselves if they knew they had a family member, if they knew they were going to use, and if they knew and that was a big time in Rhode Island that started, and now it's much more available for anybody and everybody to get, and a lot of facilities will actually, when they even write for buprenorphine, will also write for Narcan to make sure it's in the house just in case.
Okay. Let's also, as we kind of go through some of these concepts, to set some more of a better level of understanding, Suboxone. Talk to us
Hmm.
about Suboxone, its sort of its origins, and what is its common use, and what is its my understanding, of course, and I'm not an expert, but is that there most of these are opioid based, but its connection, if you will, or kindred what does it have in common with methadone?
So let me put as methadone is a full opiate like Oxy, Vicodin, Perk, but it's a synthetic in a way to try to time release it a little differently. So they all go to the same receptor. So the opiate receptor looks like a cup. Let's just say it looks like a cup. And when you take an opiate, when it goes to that cup, it pours out dopamine, and that dopamine is pain relief, but it also can be too much pain relief and overdose you. The methadone goes into that cup and is less of it's a full opiate, but it is synthetically made to do something, and it can cause it, if taken too much, can cause an overdose, but monitored correctly on a daily dosing, it can relieve a person from the withdrawal symptoms. Buprenorphine, which is the main ingredient in Suboxone being buprenorphine and naloxone, which is like Narcan, is an oral base. That buprenorphine goes to the same receptor, but it's only a partial opiate. But when it sits in the cup, when it sits in the receptor, what's called the half life has a 32, approximately half life of 32 hours, meaning it sits there and stays there. And if you know anything about, if you've ever taken an opiate before, when the doctor says for pain reduction, you take it every 3 to 6 hours. Well, there's your half life. So when it's wearing off, that you'd have to add more. But the half life of the oral Suboxone is 32 hours. So when you take it on a daily basis and it stays on much longer, then you get a half life of the next 32 hours. So the potential is that dopamine level and the medication level, your body, it's calming that system down to no longer go into withdrawals and stabilize. And more importantly, when it sits in that receptor, it also blocks other opiates from coming on board. So if you have taken the medication correctly and have a high coverage of those receptors, and you try to take OxyContin or Vicodin or Percocet, they don't have a place to bind because the receptor is covered. Hence, it prevents a lot of people from, it prevents if they try to slip, it still will show that they tried to slip, but if taken properly, they might not experience any high at all, even taking a small opiate. The next newest one is the injectable form, which is a same company called Sublocade, and that form, injected once a month, has a half-life of 40 to 60 days. Not just 24 hours, 40 to 60 days. So what happens is you are full blocker status for that whole month. And because it's injection, a high dose of buprenorphine in your system really protects you, and more importantly, staves off the craving a patient experiences, as well as blocks a lot of opiate.
Let's talk about fentanyl for a second. You alluded to it just a few moments ago. What is fentanyl? And, I come from a time where folks were obsessed with the notion that cannabis could be laced with angel dust. And that was, of course, the horror story that was put out across the land, that you would end up in raging fits, hallucinogenic fits, and all of that because of it being laced. Now we've got fentanyl. Where is fentanyl from? What impact does it have, and why is it so deadly?
Well, it's a pharmacological product that was created for large animals at one point in time. Carfentanil was actually a painkiller, what I believe, for elephants, and to try to stay off certain types of animals, that they created this drug. And some reports, depending on the purity, can be almost 500 times stronger than OxyContin. So when you're looking at that, that's a huge, huge hit. And carfentanil is supposed to be even stronger. And this particularly means that when it goes to the receptor, it blasts so much, it just stops your body. And I'll use it. I don't want to go scientific, technical, but people have had Novocaine for a tooth. And if you put enough dopamine in your system, it's like Novocating your lungs. They just decide not to breathe anymore. And that's when you're taking too much opiates, your whole body, and it's not Novocaine, but that's the expect. Your body just says, I don't have to breathe. The lungs don't have to. And that's where and
I'm
it
sorry,
can
go
come
ahead.
faster behind the purity, where fentanyl comes in like a raging bullet.
And is Narcan effective against that at all, at any level?
Right. So if someone is on that depending on the purity of the fentanyl, so the fentanyl comes in like a big sponge and wipes off those receptors right away. And that's where all of a sudden the body shoots back into rhythm and starts to breathe again. That's where you'll see someone on Narcan, and you've seen it on maybe on television or on the news. And we have reports of the people that all of a sudden they blue, and all of a sudden they give them a couple nasal sprays of Narcan or the injection, and the person immediately pops up and breathes real quick, and they almost look normal. It's almost like getting this adrenaline punch into their body. They still have a lot of fentanyl or opiate still in their system, but the Narcan has displaced it. It's taken it off the receptors to allow the body to go back to respond. So I'm trying not to make any of this really kind of scientific, because that would be, just, I want people to just understand at a basic level what's going on. So it's kind of like a sponge to take it off and keep that opiates away, having the body digest that off, and keeping the Narcan on for about 3 to 5 hours. The Narcan stays there, and hopefully the opiate level has dissipated way down from the body's normal digesting of it. And just as long as the person doesn't go back out and use, and that's happened as well.
Right.
And it's a vicious cycle.
And that's where we see these apocryphal stories about folks who have been revived dozens of times, where the same emergency responders come out time and time again to the same households, the same apartments, the same places of
When
business.
you take someone off, so I've taken all these opiates off the system and revived them. Now they're going into free fall withdrawal. The whole body's screaming, "Feed me, Seymour." That's one of my other favorites. It's like, "Feed me," or I'm going to put you into further withdrawal. So the body's now going, I need an opiate to stabilize that dopamine level to get back, or I'm going to make you sick, throw up, and feel horrible and have aches and pains. So when a person who can't find their opiates, that's what they're going to experience. So we're gonna with Narcan, it kind of pushes them through part of that, and then without any opiates on their system and it's clean, they're going to start experiencing withdrawal. So when they leave the emergency room and they go back out and say, "Oh, you saved my life. I'm better. I won't do much more," but 3 to 4 hours later, they start feeling really, really bad. And when an addict feels really bad, they want to find a solution. Maybe I'll just try some more.
Right.
And that other suspension they had in there could kill them.
And
Yeah.
here's part of the madness. You've got a couple of situations where folks who either A, went through a Narcan experience, or B, uh, went through some type of intense detoxification in a while being incarcerated, often come
Hmm.
out, much to the relief of everybody, frankly, fall prey again to their addiction and die at an incredibly high rate. Is just the body just unable to fend off the attacks that these have on the neural system? I mean, what happens there?
Well, there was a period of time in the Boston area that where when people were coming out, if they were incarcerated for a number of years and came back out, the purity level's higher, and their
Mhm.
body isn't ready for a higher purity amount of heroin. And they would say, I used to do 5 to 7 bags of heroin a day, and they come out and they do three, but the purity level is so high, it's like 12, equal to about 12, and they don't know how much they're shooting up, and then they overdose, and they haven't been on it, and they overdose and die that way. Rhode Island at least has Kodak has responded, and a number of different facilities have responded into the Rhode Island jails to offer people even Suboxone or methadone treatment before they're released to try to get them on something before they release so they can help block it. But it's still going to come down to free will. It's still going to come down to the client themselves to see if when they come out, and if they've gone, and there's a lot of in-house uh, incarcerating trainings. Jim Gillen and Anchor was the creators that really did a great job of trying to get in there to the clients and in the jails, and to grab them and educate them before they came out.
Right.
To some extent it works, some extent it doesn't, but at least they're trying. So there's more that does work.
Folks, if you're just joining us, Greg Graustein is the Chief Clinical Director for Recovery Connections Centers of America. There is a facility here in Providence that is available to folks, as well as facilities and a growing footprint of facilities around Massachusetts. Let's talk about your centers for just a second. You know,
Hmm.
you often hear conversations about bed space and about lockdowns and being in a facility for a period of time. How does your facility proceed? Is it on an outpatient basis? How do you folks work?
It's an outpatient. So we're a large small base facility. It's all outpatient OBOT, and what that means is the clients come in, they receive their buprenorphine, they see a counselor, they see the doctor, and they do a urine screen, and they're supported with that counseling to make a treatment plan with the doctor of recovery. Um, we are a little bit different than the standardized, because we do a small footprint, and we do this intentionally. That because of our offices only have a manager, a counselor, and a doctor, we're able to go into a lot of areas and not create a big stir to the community, but we're also not able we're able to break down the stigma, what has been created by past history of large facilities. And I'm not going to throw methadone completely under the bus, but lining people up in the morning, 50 or 60 people on the street waiting in line to get their dose, creates stigma, uh,
The
it
methadone
creates
mile, right?
methadone mile of people. Can you imagine doing it yourself? The self-esteem building is not there. So what we've done is to create that, is that with that we get individual cases, no more than 4 people in the office at any one time. We create a model that has a person treated correctly, safely, and without stigma, and to make sure it's not an impact to the community, because that's always been a big sticking point. Oh, you're going to draw all these
Right.
people in, and have breakdown of facilities. All our facilities are dead center next to, from residential properties in Providence to next to businesses in Attleboro and Taunton, next to stores and churches. We are next to a lot of different community places, and they at first were standoffish and against us. And now, since we've been in going for years, they come back, and we've had stories of people coming over and saying, I just love how you're treating the people. You've been no impact to our businesses. In fact, we want to support you more. And all of our offices have had that happen.
Hmm. So you're taking a radically different approach then to recovery, as opposed to these either for the wealthy, and I'm generalizing here because I want you to react to some of these sort of cliches and urban legends. In one sense, you've got the methadone mile approach. You've also got these expensive residency programs that you often read about, from the lifestyles of the rich and famous. The Betty Ford Clinic, I guess, was one of the early adopters of that model. Is there any one size fits all? Why the disparate approaches?
Just like AA teaches, whatever works, work it. There's so many differentials of what's happening to a client, from PTSD, for abusive relationships, abusive family, lack of supports, or injury. If we have a broad spectrum of types of treatment available, it is up to the client to all of a sudden go, you know what? I don't like being in a room and waiting 2 hours with 50 other people waiting to see the doctor. I like going to a small facility that can treat me quickly, fairly, and comfortably. I don't need to go to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Resort when I can get private care treatment in a small facility. You may have, and because a 60% comorbidity into this field, you may have a lot of psychological problems, and that person may need a psychiatrist that also gives buprenorphine, and maybe they've been a rape victim or abuse victim, and that also need in tandem the psychological support plus the addiction support of buprenorphine treatment and Suboxone treatment. So we need this spectrum of care for the people that want to go to Maui to that resort passages that can afford that at $3,000 a day.
Right, Newport. And, right, there's a facility in Newport.
Or you can go, and depending on your insurance, depending on where you can go. But it really comes down to matching the client of what needs that they have in their need of support. Some people don't need a lot. Some people need a full mental health agency that they were masking a major mental illness underneath it, and they were using drugs to cover it. And if you have ever, God willing, experiencing an ongoing voice in your head or delusions, hallucinations, and the only way, and you've tried a lot of the antipsychotics and medications in the mental health field that work in a large way very efficiently, but when certain cases it doesn't, but a fifth of vodka does, or taking some other painkillers does. And that's how, you have that empathy of just saying, well, geez, that's hard to deal with as well. And I can almost understand why you have to drink or do drugs, but let's try to get you a better medication to treat the underlying cause. So there's a lot of different reasons why we need all different types of facilities, from the large Walmart size, as I say, right down to internal medicine doctors doing Suboxone for their clients that all of a sudden became hooked on because they had knee surgery, and they can treat them, and maybe their environment wasn't so impacted, or family or job wasn't overly impacted, and hopefully they get some counseling to support, but been on buprenorphine, and it stabilized them.
Couple of loaded
questions. Us to that point.
Right.
Go ahead.
A couple of loaded questions here. You brought up insurance. Number one, and I'm not, I understand the treatment's I'm not looking to do a cost comparison or drill down to that level of detail, but number one, do you find a great deal of coverage for folks who are functioning and are still employed? And what are your thoughts? And here's a here's a loaded one. You know, as we look at our criminal justice system here in Rhode Island, and we look at the prison system, the ACI, and we look at the enormous amounts of money that are pumped into the criminalization of chemical dependency, what does it say to you about how those resources could be spent elsewhere by treating it as a disease as opposed to a crime?
That's a good question. Now you got me off guard a little bit. So, the decriminalizing. So I work with a lot of the local courts, and you hear what's called drug courts. I'm going to refer them now as recovery courts because
Okay.
it's a stigmatizing thing, drug courts, and so
Right.
recovery courts is a better non-stigmatizing way. And we offer them, instead of taking someone and putting in because they get caught with the old day of getting a dime bag gets you a couple time 10 days in jail or something.
Right.
What's that going to do for you? It's not going to do anything. But if you're doing other drugs, now the drug courts will call us up and saying he's agreed to treatment instead of incarceration. One, that's fantastic for the client if he agrees and he has to stay with us and try to break through and stay in recovery or get incarcerated. Number two, it saves the taxpayer tons of money, saves everything a lot of uh, in that way for us, and it doesn't increase that person's validity of getting a job again and saying, well, I have all these criminal acts against me. But no, wait a minute, he sought treatment, he's seeking, he's trying to recover. And so the move afoot of, instead of, all right, marijuana is now legalizing, but other drugs are illegal, and to decriminalize, it's more importantly to let's stop that and get people into recovery that want to be in recovery. And sometimes it's a legal push as well.
Right. We come to a point now where we've got this landmark legislation that's been passed.
Mhm.
There are folks in the recovery community that I met, as the coalition has been blessed, if you will, to have been allowed into the conversation, to witness the conversation that's taking place in a variety of levels across Rhode Island with regard to recovery. Full disclosure, if you've never listened to the show and you listen in the future to this segment, the editorial attitude, if you will, of the Coalition Radio Network is clearly driven towards full legalization of drugs and moving to a completely recovery-based environment. So we editorially were thrilled, if you will, with the passage of this legislation. A lot of people, not so much, caught them by surprise. Oh well. We've got harm reduction centers. Your thoughts on harm reduction centers, and maybe you can explain from your perspective what you see happening at a harm reduction center.
Well, for harm reduction centers, and I appreciate we talked a little bit about, and as we talked on the radio as well, harm reduction center is well needed. I know this is very difficult for a lot of people to understand, that a harm reduction center is a place that someone can come and use their drug, and it will be in this under the safety of a medical facility, that will, if the person is taking something too much and overdoses, that they'll be able to be stabilized with Narcan or got medical treatment right away. As we talked just briefly, how many people have died during the pandemic because they weren't around someone with Narcan. This is not in place. Okay, now the pandemic's over, just let them go back to their friends. No, this is going to be safety. So I can understand it, as I spoke, as they'll test the product as well to say, you think it's heroin? No, it's all fentanyl. And maybe, and they will also be able to provide that person material and supports. And if the person is willing to want to come to a recovery center, those recovery centers are going to be able to be referred directly to. Like mine would be able to see a person probably within the same day. Our Providence site is open 6 days a week, and we could be able to get to see that person right away. as well as my other facilities throughout Massachusetts. We're able to see someone within that day. The only day we don't work is Sundays, and only 2 days a year, and that's Christmas and Thanksgiving as well. So we put it down to meeting where the patient is at. Those recovery centers are meeting the patient where they're at. The epidemic and people are dying. What I said on the radio was at least a 747 jet every week smashes to the ground with no survivors. Every week for years? How many more weeks do we have to put up with that? When do you realize there's something wrong with the plane? And the plane is, we need to do something about it. The plane is the country. We need to find them before they overdose. So if they're coming into a recovery center, meeting staff that are going to be not stigmatizing, going to make sure what they're taking is what they expect to be taking. Two, giving them information and safety about what they're doing. If they do decide to use a drug, that they're monitored. Then they're also going to be, and I'm sure that there's going to be legal limits to when a person is allowed to leave, to be so they're not staggering and walking in front of a car.
Right.
And that's legal to any medical center doing any kind of medical care, that you'd have to have that. Maybe they would have to have someone to drive them, and that person's not impaired, a safe driver, should we say, and to be able to do that as well. These centers are meeting someone. Instead of us having the statistic of death, we can decrease that. And I realize hundreds of EMS calls a year in Rhode Island, hundreds, that the police have to respond to, fire department respond to, that the ambulances are responding to. If we're doing this, we can cut down that expense. We can cut down that where that police officer is having to go there. Maybe he's more in need to do something else. And more importantly, we can reach a person right at the depth of having that is ready to put a needle in their arm or snort something, and to be able to educate them of other opportunities. It might be not the first time, the second time, or the third time they come. And maybe that person will say, thank you for treating me as a person. I know it's my choice to do this. And that's the biggest part. Can't take someone's choice away, but meeting them and educating them. And maybe at the next time they come in, they'll say, all right, I'm ready. Why don't we try recovery?
I guess I shouldn't have been, but a couple of comments on this. First of all, I'm stunned by the level, I'll say, of vitriol. How about that? Is that a good word for tonight? Vitriol at the very idea. And I guess I probably shouldn't have been, but I'm stunned at some of the comments and attitudes. Because I think we all understand you can think bad thoughts, but it takes a lot of extra to sort of put those into words. And you can say bad things in the heat of the moment, but to write them down in the form of social media and the level of hate I've seen is astonishing. It takes my breath away. And I'm a cynical middle-aged Irishman whose family roots are from Jersey and Brooklyn. So that's saying something. You're seeing some of the most horrible sentiments thrown out. From your years of experience, having seen this firsthand, for so many people, does the tragedy have to hit home before there's all of a sudden a comprehension, about the humanity of this?
Sometimes it does. We've had, and I won't pick on the town that refused to allow us to come into a town, and the town council had voted completely against any kind of recovery centers to be near them because they didn't want to draw people in addiction to there. And it took a town council member's son to overdose and die. And all of a sudden it changed the plight. We hear that. My company, our incorporated company, is fighting a number of towns right now that are trying to prevent us from coming in with this small model because of the fear of what's happened in the past. So the public, there's so much outrage when you see, when you experience it, you hear it, and you get angry at it, and anger comes out towards just let them die, or just those people. it must be that class of people. It's not. This is, and then all of a sudden you hear this tragedy. Oh, I love the news report that says, the you know, the death the death hasn't been determined, but he has a history of addiction in the past. Well, what do you think happened? So the Hollywood studio one, that always is a key wording that says, you know, it hasn't been divulged yet. Well, the embarrassment that he was on heroin, he overtook too many pills and drugs, um, and oh, it was just because they were famous and they had too much money, and they couldn't do any better. Or it's um, the amount of people now affected. Each addict, what they project, is connected to at least 20, is impacted at least 20 other people. And so with that and the number of overdose and deaths that are increasing, it is getting momentum to people like, oh my God, there is an issue. Look at this. There's more and more people dying that I knew are dying. And I knew him. He went to high school with me. He was a great guy. He was a football player. He was a soccer player. He was whatever. And he died of an overdose. Oh, and what do they call it? A mistaken overdose? What's the, I can't remember.
Yeah.
By chance, it's by chance he overdosed. By chance? I don't
Well, I mean,
think by chance.
we all know how to read the code words in the obituaries now. When you see someone under
Sure.
the age of 40 die of a sudden unexpected death, if you've got any experience with life in itself and you haven't lived in a protected bubble, you tend to almost over count that was probably an overdose death. I mean, and
accidental death. That's what they say. The accidental overdose. Okay, so you're not classifying it as a suicide, but he used drugs and accidentally used just too much.
had a bad day.
Right? That's just, yeah, had a bad day. Had a bad last day. But
well,
yeah, it's the coding of the words that really people are finally catching on to. And it's the embarrassment of the family. They're saying, well, we never addressed it. Oh, we should have, or he lost his battle.
Right.
And,
that's
one of my other, and for Recovery Connection Center, ours is, if they're still above ground, there's hope. And if it's going into a safety site or walking in our doors, even if they have had using our buprenorphine or Suboxone and they have other drugs in their system, we're not kicking them out because they're still above ground and there's hope and they walked in, and we want to keep in training them. We will not kick them out. That's one of the biggest scares of a lot of facilities that say, oh no, 3-strike rule, you should have cleaned up yourself all the way. Well, they showed up. They're still trying to help themselves at some level, and centers need to do that. One of the biggest problems right now is access to treatment in a lot of places, and some of the limitations because they're too big and they have so many people or so many, and they're like, well, he's not ready yet. Well, no, wait a minute. He showed up. He's ready to some level. We need to adapt to that. Just like these safety sites, it's adapting to what the patient needs, not to some high-end scientific guy that says, oh, we do it this way, and that's what. No, meet the client right there. They're the mad scientist that tries all the drugs. A scientist thinks what the combination will do. The mad scientist is the client that puts it into themselves and say, this is what it does. But we need to meet them there to try to give them help.
Let me throw another situation that I'm sure you've seen too many times. In a sense, with these harm reduction centers, you are, or I should say the recovery community, not you personally per se, but the recovery community is throwing upside down a law enforcement model that goes back to the movie The French Connection. And yes, I'm old enough to remember The French Connection. and the culture has always been, you see, go after the dealers, you'll put them out of business. Go after the key distributors, you'll put them out of business. Go after the narco-terrorists, it'll end, and we'll win the war on drugs. The war on drugs as we've defined it, is that ever going to be winnable?
No. And because it's become smarter, a simple way of thinking about this and how has drugs become smarter? When you and I grew up and marijuana was half the potency and would be in bales of hay. It took a lot of space and it was harder to get distributed. And because it was huge and big, and cocaine was the same thing, it was large. And what happens is if you bring the potency up higher into a drug, but make it easier to distribute, meaning it make it smaller and easier to get a high dose in a very small package,
Right.
hence fentanyl, hence where crack cocaine came from. Instead of snorting at what was 52, the disco 52 in New York, or 50
Studio
or Club
52.
54.
Studio
Yeah,
54.
but it was a large thing that you had lines of cocaine. And instead of, now they figured out, oh, well, I have to do it with baking soda and make crack. It was smaller in the high in density. So to deliver this drugs, what's happened is that you have more high potency to close to death with a higher high, but the packaging itself is so small. A fentanyl pack, a carfentanil, can be the size of a sugar packet that could kill hundreds of carfentanil. That would be the elephant tranquilizer. The fentanyl, just a couple grains. And we've seen a police officer, I read, that who had came upon it and brushed his face with the fentanyl, and he overdosed, and didn't know it was on his hands. And so when you have, as a dealer of whatever, if you're from another country or you're creating this and from Japan to wherever, to deliver it's easier now,
Right.
because it's smaller and more potency is up. So that's why the fight on drugs is still going to be, they're beating us by creating a drug more lethal because it's smaller. So I'm sorry to say, it's always going to be there.
And from your professional experience, has a prohibition model, a legal system based on prohibition, ever worked at any level for any vice, any behavior?
I don't think so.
It's another conversation at a different time, but watching the federal government literally, what's the old copy paste? The failure of the war on drugs onto the war on sex workers is bizarre. Because again, at this point, all one has to do is go back to the Volstead Act with booze, and as they say, we know how the movie ends. And it doesn't end well for really anybody. And there never is an end to the production, and there never is an end to we used to call it the gangsters and the mob, and now we call it narco-terrorism because that sounds kind of cool and kind of hip. But it's also, as importantly, it takes place somewhere else very far away. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go down to the New Mexican border and meet with folks during the refugee crisis who were, in many cases, literally fleeing narco-terrorism in Central and Latin America. Right. And essentially by us offshoring the production of our drugs, we've ensured that, well, the entire continent is screwed. All because if we simply refused to understand that we can't legislate behavior. We just can't. We are all sinners, right? We are all weak on something. For me, it's carbs. Other people, it's other things. I'm trying to be, I'm not trying to be flip, but I'm trying to put it in a human perspective. We've only got a few minutes left, but this has been a powerful conversation, and I am grateful for you to spend this time with us. Can you take us through, in sort of our last little segment here, the process? Let's just say for some reason, someone has reached a point where it could be because of a legal entanglement, as we mentioned earlier. Because of a family member. It could be looking into the eyes of their small child, and understanding that, this is what they're throwing away. People reach that moment where they're ready, at least at some level. What happens?
So I call it the 10,000 pound phone, and A number of our clients that call us actually have been on Suboxone on the street. They've gone into some type of withdrawal. The dealer that they picked up actually got some kind of Suboxone and they've actually taken it and found some relief. And then they decide maybe I need a full clinical medical. They call our phone number 877-553-3155. That will give them the host of whatever centers near them that will take it, and we will be able to provide them either that day or the following day access to come into our facility. That person needs to is welcomed in. They're going to give an urine screen, immediately see that doctor, and then start to.
Oh, we're breaking up a little bit. Hang in there. Did we lose Greg? Greg, if you could log back in again. Folks, we're taking a quick break. Right? Oh, you're back. Great. All right. Thank you.
All right.
So, okay. So you were at the point where they'd been on the street. They'd found some form, potentially initial street form of Suboxone. Take us away.
So, and at that point in time, a person on the street may say, you know what, now I need a clinical amount because it does react well with me. And now if I can be on this every day, maybe I could stem the use because I don't crave the street drugs any longer. It will curb the craving for the opiates. They call us up. We can get to see them that day or the following day, make an appointment. They come in, they meet with the doctor, they give a urine screen, and then on the same day, they sit with the counselor right after seeing the doctor and start on a week-to-week basis seeing the doctor, seeing the counselor, and creating that treatment plan, seeing the reaction of the Suboxone or the potential by history if a person has a high Narcan history, or a use for the injection. Maybe they want it instead of bringing home a medication that they have to pick up at the pharmacy, that they have a choice to do that as well. The medication works so well. It stabilizes them from no longer going to withdrawal. It stops them from craving. Now you're into recovery. And recovery is that you're working on recovering whatever you need to recover back in your life. Picking up where the damage was, picking up and making the next path, making to try to build relationships back with the family. First and foremost is to try to stop lying to yourself. One of the biggest things that clients first have to do is to stop believing their own lies. And when they do that, then they can be honest with the doctor and the counselors to saying, this is what I need to do, what I need to address. At that point in time, on a week-to-week basis, when they progress on, they may then progress on to bi-weekly. And when they're getting more and more stable and the supports of counseling and they're really involved in it, they may go to once a month counseling and support by us, but we also help them connect with other systems in the community like Anchor of Rhode Island, a number of different coalitions or supportive, maybe AA models as well, of other supports that they need and help them to do that. And we surround them with that kind of support. And why we're able to do that with this small model is because we give them that time. And we also have hours of operation that are 6 days a week in Providence, and hours that go until 7 o'clock at night. So when you get a job again, that you don't have to leave work to come see us, and you can come see us after hours, even on a Saturday morning. And so that's our goal, to get them back into society and to recover.
Does your organization take insurance? I mean, how people are obviously going to be worried and intimidated about the cost factor.
We take all insurances. And if a client is with us already and falls off their insurance, we're still going to treat them and help them try to get back on the insurance and work to the Rhode Island. And that's where some of our connections with our counselors that know there's different state avenues and supports to try to get them back onto the insurance. But we will not say if they're already engaged with us, and we will try to even help them if they call up and say, I have no insurance. we will do everything. We will still bring them in to saying, how can we help you get on insurance and to come and start treatment with us?
Right. Well,
And that's Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We take them all. A lot of facilities don't take all insurances. We will take them all.
okay. And your facility is on Wickenden Street?
Yeah, it's 381 Wickenden Street in Providence. Just as a Rhode Islander, it's just up the hill from the Coffee Exchange. I think
Yep.
people know where the Coffee Exchange is.
Yep.
And just up the hill on the right, a large house. It looks just like one of the regular houses up the road. So we really make sure it's comfortable. Right across from a pizza place that absolutely loves us, and we like their pizza.
Now, is that Pizza Pie or is that the other one?
Pizza Pie.
Pizza Pie, okay.
Yes, pizza.
The last time I one of the best shrimp pizzas I've ever had. The well, Greg, again, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned, we close out each show with what we lovingly refer to as shameless self-promotion. So, because part of the purpose of having you on was to present folks an alternative that's locally based, a high degree of efficacy, and in a footprint that I think encourages people to try and get immediate help, not to be psyched out ahead of time by the notion that they're going to face weeks waiting for a quote unquote bed. That the pricing is one of these residential centers for the rich and famous. The notion that there's other alternatives where if they're still working and they still have productive life going on, I would imagine a big part of the incentive for your model is to maintain, to be as functioning as possible, to maintain that lifeline to a job and to your family.
Absolutely.
So give us again the address, the website. How can they get in touch with you?
So it's 381 Wickenden Street in Providence. The phone number is 877-553. Did I do it wrong? 3155. And the ability, when you call that number, it will give you access to all our facilities on that. You dial which number you want for, if it's the Rhode Island, it will be number 1 for Wickenden Street in Providence, and then it will go through 6 more, and there'll be a number of other ones through Massachusetts as we add those. And we also will be adding a facility in Connecticut as well, and we plan to go up to New Hampshire and Maine next, and possibly New York after that, because we're taking this small model of approach to break the stigma, to give the supports and comfort level and the appropriate, which is now the gold standard of treatment of Suboxone and Sublocade, to provide the best access to treat opiate dependency with the correct supports and connections to the community that we can provide the patient with a best chance of recovery. If that person needs other types of supports, we will refer up or down to. If they do need a detoxification, we will actually assist them to get into that detox. If the patient has a need of higher level of care, we will make sure that referral goes up to a higher level of care. We know our abilities, and we are strong in our abilities. We actually have psych nurses that can do some evaluations for some comorbidities and to be able to treat some small mental health issues as well. So our ability is to stabilize people, bring people back into recovery. There is hope, there is treatment, and you're going to be treated as you want to be treated as a person.
Greg Graustein, he's the Chief Clinical Director at Recovery Connection Centers of America, locally based on Wickenden Street in Providence, Rhode Island. Just Google Providence and recovery, and they're going to come up. I didn't put the shameless plug of not the shameless plug, but the drughelp.com or drughelp.info will be our website as well. Right, and it's a great site. I've been up on it. Very informative, very specific. Unlike there are a variety of forms of, if you will, of entrees into the recovery community, which are far less so and are more inclined to sort of get you in and give you the pitch. I've heard that complaint about other organizations. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us, and this has been
Thank you.
Very, very helpful. I hope we continue to engage as the year progresses and as we move forward, both through this plague, if you will, but also through Rhode Island. You know, as Rhode Islanders, we all complain a lot. We just do. We're pretty cranky when it comes to our government. But when it comes to recovery, you talked about some of the individuals in the recovery community around Rhode Island. We have an astonishing variety of talents, both in the legal, the clinical, and the facilities, as well as the legislation. We continue to be, if you will, on almost not just the cutting, but the bleeding edge of legislation in terms of dealing with this. There's a saying where I come from: the denial's not a river in Egypt. Rhode Island seems hell-bent on trying to at least attempt to stem the tide, and it's heartening to be surrounded by professionals who are engaged in that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, and of course on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. If you just caught bits of this, we'll have this up on the YouTube, and we'll have this up on the website, and we'll have this up on the Facebook and the Twitter, later on this evening. There's a lot of information there. Most importantly, there's hope. Have a wonderful evening.